Valentinian the with the title the Great, was born Flavius Valentinianus, born in 321 AD. He would be a competent military general and would take over after the death of Jovian, as he was be appointed. After taking power from Jovian, he decided to split the empire in two, with his brother Valens controlling the east, while Valentinian controlled the west. This would mark the de facto separation of the empire, although I would still consider both of these Roman emperors, due to the last emperor to unify the empire being Theodosius. But you can really see the seeds of the split of the empire coming in with Valentinian and Valens. He is often called the Great due to his campaigns against the Germanic tribes. Really the last emperor to do so, to cross the Rhine and do all that. So this was successful. He would campaign against the Alemanni in 365 and 361 and the Quadi in 373. So let's talk about Theodosius in Britain. There is a major event in Valentinian's reign called the Great Conspiracy, where a coordinated assault was planned by a bunch of barbarians. These included the Picts, the Scotti, the Atticati, the Saxons, and the Franks. This shows really bad destabilization in Britain and shows that it's going further and further away from Roman orbit. But although this would be put down by the father of the future Emperor Theodosius, named Theodosius the Elder, this would show instability in Britain, as it was one of Rome's poorer provinces. So let's talk about something else that Theodosius put down, which was a revolt in Africa by Firmus. This would be put down, but we are starting to see more usurpers than we did before under, for example, Constantine. In 374, Valentinian would die. The story is often that he had an aneurysm because he was getting so mad at one Germanic chieftain who was annoying him that he had a tumor that burst and he died. This would be really bad for the empire, as he was a pretty good emperor. And although he had a reputation for being very mad and mean, he was overall a really good emperor. Let's talk about the empire, Valentinian's brother, who controlled the east. He was born Flavius Valens, born in 328 AD, a little younger than Valentinian, and he would rule the east. One of the first major problems that he had to deal with was a revolt who claimed to be a member of the Constantinian dynasty named Procopius. Valens thought about suicide and a bunch of things because he thought he was just going to die anyway. But this was eventually put down and Procopius would be killed. And another thing that Valens had was a good economic policy. This was very rare for the time period, but it was pretty good for the empire. He also improved tax collection and was pretty frugal in his spending. This would be unlike a lot of members of this time period. He also had the First Gothic War around this time, and although this was largely indecisive, it would be foreshadowing for a future event. He also had a brief Sassanid War, but this ended in a pretty indecisive thing, and they would sign a peace treaty to return to pre-war borders. So let's talk about easily the most significant event during the reign of Valens. This would be the Battle of Adrianople. For years, more and more Germans were being pushed into the Roman Empire due to the Hunnic Empire, a rivaling state that was very brutal and was pushing a lot of Germanic tribes into the more prosperous Roman Empire. And this would culminate with many Goths moving over the border into the Eastern Roman Empire under the reign of Valens. And they were being very, very badly treated. A lot of them were starving because the imperial administrators that were overseeing these Germans moving across the border were very brutal and very just incompetent at their jobs. So eventually, many Goths just started raiding the countryside and pillaging a lot of the grain and a lot of the farmers' countryside. So this proved a lot of problems. Eventually, they would organize into an army, and Valens would go to face them. Now, Valens could have easily waited for reinforcements under Gratian, uh, the successor to Valentinian, and they could have unified and easily beat the Goths. But Valens, being a very incompetent person, decided to fight them alone. Valens would be crushed at this battle, his army utterly obliterated, and he would also die. This would mark a succession crisis in the East, and also this would basically mark the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire, and at least in the West. This would mark the beginning of unrestricted Germanic access into the empire, as their field army has been utterly obliterated. A lot of people consider this the beginning of the end, and mark this as the a very good source for the decline of the Roman Empire, as this would just be very bad. And it could have been prevented if it wasn't for Valens' incompetence and his waiting for reinforcements. This would mark the end of the reign of Valens, and really just show how bad of a general Valens was, and that he really was not up to snuff to combat the mass Germanic migrations of the time. So how would we rank both of these emperors? I would put Valentinian at A tier, as he seemed competent enough to know to campaign against the Germanic tribes and try to fight them, and he did. He would be the last emperor to do so I put him A tier. I don't think he deserves the title the Great, as he wasn't like the greatest ever, but he was a very competent emperor. On the other hand, I put Valens at D tier, as not totally a failure, but certainly a terrible emperor. He cannot match up to the crisis of his reign, and paid for it with his life, the army, and the mass Germanic movements in the empire. Anyway, subscribe, like, and goodbye.